Once, in a crowded market square where dust rose like a slow breath, a wandering mystic stopped a learned man and asked a single, blunt question. When you are alive, who breathes you? And when you are dead, who breathes you then? The question was not a riddle to be solved with cleverness. It was a hammer to the comfortable certainty that we are merely observers inside a body. In that single moment, the space between life and death, between visibility and the hidden, folded open like a reed under a knife. That hinge, the place where the ordinary becomes uncanny, is where Hermetic Law 3 sits. Everything vibrates. Not as a poetic consolation, but as a practical hypothesis. The interior patterns we sustain, our emotional tones, are not private theatre. They set a frequency. They tune the field through which events are filtered, choices are made, and meaning takes shape. If everything vibrates, then the simplest and most intimate vibration you carry is the rhythm of your breath. Change that rhythm, and you nudge the world's listening. Change it enough, and the world answers differently. We will move through stories, science, and practice together. We will keep reverence when we borrow images from Sufi poets and care when we speak of nervous systems. If this idea touches something inside you, stay with me for a minute. Try one conscious breath when it comes and notice what shifts. That small experiment is the simplest way to begin testing the claim. Why your emotional state shapes reality. To hear how deep this thread runs, we begin with the reed. Listen to the old poem that Rumi made famous. The reed flute laments being cut from the reed bed. Alone, hollowed, it cries its longing as music. The song of the reed is born precisely from that wound of separation. The emptiness inside becomes the instrument through which longing speaks. The Sufi imagination uses this image not to glorify pain, but to show a paradox. Wound and wind together create voice. We are, in a sense, reed and breath both, hollowed by separation, animated by a force that passes through. Before we go deeper, one brief note. If this way of approaching alchemical studies resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. This is where these ideas are explored carefully, through psychology and physics rather than belief. Attar of Nishapur mapped the seeker's journey as a flock of birds searching for their king, across valleys of self-doubt and annihilation. Each valley required another form of inner concession, renouncing comfort, surrendering small certainties, learning to tune to a new kind of hearing. In Sufi law, breath is not merely air, it is the medium of longing and reunion. When Shams of Tabriz and the poet Rumi met, their exchange was less about doctrine and more about frequency. A glance, a question, a poem. Those small vibrations altered the course of a life. They teach us that certain interior states act like magnets. They draw certain patterns of encounter and repel others. This is metaphor, but it is also a model. Consider the reed. Hollowing creates resonance. In psychology, something similar happens when we become hollow enough to listen to the parts of ourselves we have cut off. Jung named the path of individuation the process by which the conscious self recognizes and integrates the unconscious. The work is not romantic, it is often a reassembly. Parts of us that were exiled, shame, grief, fear, find expression through breath when we give them space. Wilhelm Reich, writing and practicing a century ago, called the chronic muscular and respiratory tightenings character armor. Our habitual contractions of the body, including the way we hold our breath, are the somatic scripts of old survival strategies. They are not neutral, they color perception. Think of a child laughing, chest open, breath buoyant, eyes bright. The child's world responds. People smile. People mirror that openness. Now think of a person whose breath sits high in the chest, quick and shallow, as if waiting for an alarm that never quite arrives. Their world feels smaller, faces harden, opportunities look riskier. That is not merely imagination. It is the way somatic posture shapes the affordances we perceive. Breath is a bridge between two registers, the felt interior and the felt outer world. We can describe that bridge in anatomical terms without stripping it of wonder. The vagus nerve, the great parasympathetic highway, links the brain to the heart, lungs, and abdomen. When the vagus is engaged, it carries a chemical and electrical message that fosters calm, slow heart rate, soft muscles, a sense of safety. The mechanism is not mystical, it is biological. On the other side, sympathetic activation floods the system with adrenaline and cortisol, priming us for action, sharpening the field, but narrowing options. Simple patterns of respiration map onto these systems. A long, slow exhale tends to nudge the body toward parasympathetic regulation. Rapid, shallow breathing tends to bias the system toward sympathetic alertness. Clinical researchers and contemplative practitioners have both noticed this convergence. Breath modulates state. But notice the caution in that sentence. Modulation, not magic. Research suggests that breath influences physiology. It does not promise to rearrange the stars. What it does do is more interesting and more modest. It shifts the medium through which you perceive and relate. A nervous system oriented toward calm will notice different affordances in the environment than a system oriented toward threat. The pattern cascades. Breath alters chemistry. Chemistry shifts affect. Affect recalibrates perception. Perception informs action. And action, over time, modifies circumstance. That chain, breath to chemistry to feeling to perception to behavior, explains, in concrete steps, how a state can shape the reality that returns to us. We can draw an image. Imagine a tuning fork set into vibration beside a quiet pond. The fork's frequency sends ripples through the water. The pond's surface registers that frequency as pattern. Now imagine the fork inside you. Your emotional tone, the pitch of your exhale, the tightness in your chest. They are a set of vibrations. The field around you, socially and interpersonally, will resonate with some frequencies and dampen others. When you change the fork, the pond looks and sounds different. The clinical and somatic traditions have long noticed that trauma, by its nature, constricts breath. In an alarming situation, breath becomes narrow and protective. The body learns to conserve and brace. Over time, those patterns ossify into what Reich called armor, habitual bracing that keeps overwhelming affect at bay, but also dulls aliveness. Somatic therapists, from Reich's early work to later modalities like holotropic breathwork, have used breath intentionally to soften armor and allow stored material to move. Stanislav Grof's explorations into breath-facilitated states revealed that powerful experiences can arise when breath is intensified. These practices are potent and, if done without care, destabilizing. They can wash up material that requires holding, interpretation, and integration. That is why the sorcerer's warning from many traditions remains apt. Handle strong tools within a container. This is also why we must be wary of spiritual materialism, the tendency to collect altered states as trophies. A moment of rapture can be mistaken for transformation if it is not followed by integration. Real change often looks less glamorous. It is a rearrangement of habits, a softer way of relating to fear, a newly sustained capacity to notice rather than react. The goal is not to chase bliss, but to alter the background hum so that different actions become possible. Ask yourself, what if the thing you've been avoiding is not an enemy, but a doorway? What if the constriction in your chest is an unopened room, with a voice trying to be heard? The reed's lament is not a call to languish in pain. It is an invitation to become an instrument, not by trying to manufacture a song, but by making space for breath to pass through you. We have been speaking in metaphor and anatomy, and now we layer in a familiar psychological map. Jung invited us to regard the unconscious as a reservoir of contents that require illumination. Individuation is never merely an intellectual process, it is also a somatic one. When repressed affect meets conscious attention, often via breath or movement, it can be recognized, named, and integrated. This requires courage and usually guidance. The image of the seeker moving through Attar's valleys fits here. One cannot bypass certain thresholds. There is a valley of stubbornness, a valley of annihilation, a valley of longing. Each demands a particular quality of inner posture. The 4 stations of breath give us a practical scaffold for that posture. Take them not as dogma, but as a map we can trace with our attention. Inhale, the gathering, pause at fullness, the threshold. Exhale, the offering, pause at emptiness, the womb or receptivity. Each station corresponds to bodily and psychic moves. The inhale builds. It taxes the sympathetic edge slightly as it calls for oxygen, resource, readiness. The brief pause at the top is a gateway, a moment when we can choose to identify with the accumulation or to recognize its ephemeral nature. The exhale, when honored, becomes an act of release, not renunciation in the sense of negation, but a letting go that makes room. The pause after the exhale is often overlooked. It is the silence in which the new can germinate. The Sufi dancer knows these stations as a rhythm. The neuroscientist notes them as modulators of vagal tone. Mapping these onto the nervous system, we see correspondences. The inhale tends to prime, the exhale soothes. Extending the exhale relative to the inhale tips the balance toward parasympathetic activity. The pause at the top may briefly sustain sympathetic activation, but also affords a vantage. The pause at the bottom is paradoxically the place of regeneration. The embodied metaphor fits the biology. Breath is not only movement of air, but movement of attention. With attention, breath becomes a lever. It is a way to nudge the whole system rather than a surgical intervention on a single muscle. Yet the path of breathing is not only physiology, it is also ethical and social. When we change our inner tone, we alter our invitations to others. A person who breathes with curiosity invites curiosity. One who breathes with distrust invites closedness. Remember the marketplace image. Small gestures, slight shifts, can trigger profound changes in encounter. The mystic's question, who breathes you, reframes agency. Are you a passive occupant of a system of reactions, or do you steward a resonant field? We can test this in modest ways before committing to anything intense. For instance, notice your breath now. Where does it live in your body? Does it sit high in the chest, trapped beneath a collar of worry? Does it move fully into the belly, slow and wide? Notice without judgment. The phenomenon to observe is how perception trots to the lead of physiology. When your breath is narrow, your anecdotes will be about scarcity. When your breath widens, narratives of possibility come easier. This is not proof of magical causation. It is evidence of a feedback loop. Physiological posture and emotional valence co-create one another. There are also social reverberations. Think of a room where one person is visibly unsettled. The group tightens. Conversely, a calm presence can drop a field of safety. The field we carry, our emotional vibration, is contagious in small, often unconscious ways. This is not to suggest moral responsibility for others' choices, but to point to an ecology. We are embedded in responsive systems. The reed does not make music in isolation. It needs breath and air, and an attentive ear. We must return to caution. Some of you may carry histories that make intentional breathing practices risky without support. If breathwork brings up overwhelming sensations or memories, seek a therapist or somatic practitioner who can offer structure and containment. Holotropic approaches and deep breathwork have opened profound doors for many, but they are not suitable for everyone at every time. The ethical posture here is humility. Breath is powerful. Respect it. If a practice destabilizes you, professional care is the responsible next step. And yet, within the ordinary day, small experiments are available to everyone. The 4 stations are a doorway that does not require a ritual hall or a guru. You can practice noticing the inhale as gather, the top pause as choice, the exhale as release, and the bottom pause as receptivity. The point is not to achieve an altered state, but to test the hypothesis that changing your vibration changes your perception. Begin small. A single breath that honors all 4 stations will show you the qualitative difference between being hijacked by reactivity and being an agent of attunement. It will not solve your life, but it will provide evidence. What keeps this theory from becoming sentimental is the interplay of specificity and humility. Hermetic Law 3, everything vibrates, gives us a frame, but the frame does not tell us exactly which events will shift or by how much. It tells us that certain inputs make some outcomes more probable. It tells us that a sustained habitual inner tone becomes a gravitational center around which choices orbit. The poetic traditions teach that transformation requires both practice and surrender. The psychophysiological account shows where practice can intervene. Now imagine the small experiment scaled. Think of a leader who regularly breathes into steadiness before meetings, not to perform calmness, but to cultivate it. Over months, people around them begin to take different risks, feel safer, speak more freely. The leader did not conjure miracles. They adjusted the background hum so the room's dynamics would allow different possibilities. Or consider a caregiver who learns to lengthen an exhale in the presence of a frightened child. The child's system registers that tone and down-regulates. These are modest, testable stories of how inner state and outer reality converse. And if this perspective has been useful so far, the like button simply tells me this kind of work is worth continuing. We must also ask, what happens to the ego in this work? One risk is to use breath as a cosmetic for self-enhancement, to collect experiences and elevate identity through altered states. That is spiritual materialism in practice. True depth work usually deflates the ego's grand narratives because it exposes the seams. The reed song is not a prize to win. It is an invitation to humility. Jung's individuation is not ego expansion, it is ego transformation, a reordering that takes in what was once denied. Breathwork can accelerate the encounter with shadow content. When it does, the practice that follows matters more than the peak itself. Integration is the slow work of aligning new insights with daily choices. At this point we have traced a map, from market question to reed song, from Sufi metaphor to Jungian integration, from Reich's armor to the Vegas's gentle coaxing. We have introduced the 4 stations as a structural motif and sketched the causal chain: breath, chemistry, emotion, perception, behavior. We have also named the ethical contours: caution for trauma, warning against spiritual materialism, and the insistence on container and guidance for intense practices. If this framework is clicking for you, write in the comments. State shapes perception, so where do we go from here? The path forward is not another lecture, but a simple experiment that invites evidence. The theory asks to be tested, not merely admired. In a moment there will be an opportunity to try a single deliberate breath that touches each station, a modest demonstration of how quickly vibration can shift. But before we do that, we need one more articulation. The idea of resonance, not as mystical woo, but as an observable social and physiological phenomenon. How does vibration travel? How does a private state translate into a public pattern? To answer that, we will return to another image, one of tuning forks and shared air, and trace it through micro-interactions, the glance, the pause, the reply. The market square will return. The same place where a question once toppled certainty will show us how small alterations in tone change the pattern of encounter. Pause here with that image. Keep the sound of the reed in the ear. Feel the idea that breath is a lever, and notice the smallest change that just occurred when you read "in a moment" and imagined exhaling more fully. That slight shift, a tendency, not an injunction, is a test run of the Hermetic claim: vibrations do things. Next, we will unfold those micro-interactions into a set of practical cues and a guided, safe experiment with breath that honors physiology and the need for containment. We will watch how a single breath can, in microcosm, demonstrate the path from inner vibration to change perception and, consequently, to altered relational reality. Let us follow the tuning fork image into the small moments that make up a life. The glance that softens into a smile, the pause that lets an honest sentence land, the breath that lengthens and lowers a voice. These are the micro-interactions where private vibration becomes public pattern. When you enter a room with a particular charge, you do not merely bring a mood. You bring a field that affects how others orient, what they risk saying, and what kinds of responses your presence invites. That is the practical meaning of resonance. Private states are not sealed. They leak, they invite, they repel. To make this less abstract, consider a simple experiment you can try in the next conversation you have. Before you speak, take the 4 stations as a mini skeleton for how you will show up. Gather. A breath that intentionally draws you into your body. Pause. A brief full stop that asks, "What am I making this about?" Offer. An exhale that lets something go so you can speak from less reactivity. Receptivity. The soft silence after speaking in which you actually listen. This sequence will not guarantee a perfect outcome, but it will change the quality of the exchange because it nudges your nervous system and therefore the patterning that others pick up. If you are skeptical, test it in low-stakes settings. Try it when ordering coffee in front of a mirror or while waiting for a delayed train. The key is small iterations and curiosity, not grand commitments. Neuroscience and contemplative traditions converge here. Repetition changes baseline. A habit of lengthened exhale, practiced weekly or daily, gradually biases the nervous system toward a calmer attractor. Over time, that bias alters how you read cues, how you take risk, and what you invite back from the world. It is not mystical intervention, it is the slow physics of practice. And this is where many people quietly get stuck. They understand the idea, they repeat the words, they visualize, but internally they're still trying to believe, instead of actually feeling. If you've ever noticed that gap between knowing what should work and not seeing consistent results, I left something in the pinned comment that explores this exact missing piece. It's about how emotion stops being imagined and starts becoming embodied, not as belief, not as positive thinking, but as a lived internal state that the nervous system can actually sustain. You'll find it in the first pinned comment. It's there for those who recognize themselves in this distinction. Now let us offer a clear, gentle practice you can use right away. This is not a shortcut to enlightenment. It is an experiment in evidence gathering. If you have cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, are pregnant, or know that intense breath changes your state in destabilizing ways, shorten the counts and move with caution. If you have trauma history and are unsure, do this with a practitioner or a trusted companion present. The practice is designed to be simple and accessible. Notice, breathe, observe. Sit or stand with a posture that feels both relaxed and upright. Allow your shoulders to soften and your jaw to unclench. Place attention at the edge of the ribs, where breath is most clearly felt. We will move through the 4 stations in a single cycle. Begin with the inhale. Gather the breath slowly, as if you are drawing scent into the back of the throat and into the belly. If you like numerical cues, imagine a soft count of 4. Breathe into that tempo without forcing. At the top, pause gently. Do not grip the pause. Hold the perceptual frame for a moment. This is the threshold, just a breath-sized stillness. 1 or 2 counts will do. The point is to create a choice point, not to lock the chest. Then with intention, exhale. Release more slowly than you inhaled. Allow the exhale to be the liberating movement. If you used a count of 4 on the inhale, imagine an exhale of 6 to 8, not as a hard rule, but as a guideline to lengthen the release. Let the out-breath carry away a wordless offering, a letting go of tension or a small sacrifice of reactivity. After the exhale, rest in the bottom pause, that place of receptive emptiness. This is not nothing. It is the quiet in which something like newness can form. Be with it for a beat. Notice the subtle shifts in the chest and belly, the tiny rewiring of attention. Repeat this cycle 2 or 3 times. No hyperventilation, no breath holding that causes dizziness. Just careful, intentional movement through inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Observe what changes in your inner weather and your surface perception. Perhaps the edges around your emotional tone soften. Perhaps you notice a different memory comes forward or a small easing in the jaw. Make a 1-line note afterward. What changed for you? That single entry will act as data. After the practice, resist the urge to rush back into habitual narrative. Instead, ask one simple question. What is different in what I notice? Ground that difference with a small behavioral commitment. Speak more slowly. Place your hand on your belly for a moment when confronted, or take 3 of these cycles before a difficult call. These modest acts are the integration that prevents experience from becoming mere souvenir. Integration is the ethical heart of this work. Breath can open halls and corridors inside us. Integration furnishes those rooms with the furniture of understanding, language, context, and small, reliable actions. Without integration, experiences risk becoming trophies. Spiritual materialism, that seductive tendency to treat states as evidence of spiritual progress, is a common trap. The remedy is always the same. Practice with humility. Return to ordinary conduct and let the work appear in how you treat others and how you keep commitments. If the breath opens material that feels big, intense images, old physical sensations, a wave of grief, welcome the material as messenger. Do not assume you must interpret it alone. A therapist trained in somatic approaches, a skilled breathwork facilitator, or a trusted mentor can provide the container you need. Sometimes the most courageous move is to ask for help. It is not a sign of failure. It is an ethical use of community. Let us speak briefly about shadow work and the ways breath can catalyze it. The breath's capacity to access buried affect is one reason it appears in traditions across the world. Jung's map reminds us that what is repressed does not disappear. It collects energy and seeks expression. When breath loosens the armor, previously cramped emotions may emerge as images, tremors, or conversational resistances. The appropriate response is curiosity, not shame. Name what arises. Bring gentle language. This is grief, this is anger, this is fear. Use breath to cradle the feeling. Breathe toward it without trying to fix it. Over time, naming plus breath reduces the autonomic heat that fuels reactivity. Somatic therapies teach that the body remembers, and the breath is one vehicle to decode that memory. Reich observed the chronic patterns. Later practitioners expanded techniques to work with breath, movement, and touch. Holotropic work has demonstrated how intensified breathing can open doors to mythic material, archetypal imagery, and profound catharsis. That potency is precisely why container matters. Experienced facilitators hold space, provide grounding practices, and ensure that surfacing material does not overwhelm. I want to offer a simple template for integration you can use if material arises after a breath session. First, ground. Connect with 5 sensory anchor points in the room: the feel of your feet, the texture of a chair, the temperature of the air. Second, orient. Say out loud a simple sentence: I am here now in this place. Third, journal. Write 3 quick lines describing one image, sensation, or thought that surfaced. Fourth move, shake your hands or walk 5 steps to circulate the energy. Finally, seek counsel if the material feels sprawling or destabilizing. These steps are practical, not poetic. They are ways to turn ephemeral shifts into durable change. Over months and years, practice accumulates. The habit of settling the breath before decisions, of noticing the pause before responding, creates a new inner architecture. Psychologically, this is what Jung described as a reorientation of relation to unconscious content. Physically, it is a recalibration of baseline autonomic tone. Socially, it is the slow remodeling of the invitation you extend to others. None of this is magical in the sense of instantaneous miracles. It is magnetic. Certain possibilities become more likely when the background vibration changes. There is also a moral dimension. When you adjust your tone intentionally, you bear a kind of responsibility for how that shift affects others. This is not moralizing, it is practical. A calm presence can soothe, but it can also inadvertently dampen another's justified urgency or invalidate anger that needs expression. The ethical practice here is discernment. Learn to match your internal regulation with compassionate attunement. Ask, does my steadiness invite safety or silence? Move from a posture of curiosity. Let us return to the market square image for one more story. Imagine a modest exchange between a vendor and a customer. The customer arrives with tight breath, certain anger gathered from a long wait. The vendor responds in kind. The exchange escalates. Now imagine the customer pausing, taking 3 of the 4 station breaths, then returning with a voice that has unwound some of its immediate heat. The vendor, sensing less accusation, answers differently. The details did not change, the weight, the shortage, the crowd, but the pattern of relation did. Small shifts in internal vibration can alter the choreography of encounter in ways both subtle and consequential. This is not to suggest that you are responsible for others' choices or that breath can repair structural injustice. Breathwork does not absolve systems-level problems, nor does it replace necessary political action. What it does offer is a lever for individual and relational calibration. When many individuals cultivate steadier fields, social spaces become qualitatively different. That is the edge where personal practice meets collective consequence. Another practical domain to test this idea is leadership. Leaders who intentionally cultivate inner steadiness before meetings do more than manage their anxiety. They modify the room's affordances. People who feel safe are likelier to share, to take creative risks, and to correct course when needed. That does not mean a leader simply performs calmness as theater. Authenticity matters. The leader's breath must be integrated with ethical intent. Otherwise, steadiness can feel manipulative or inauthentic. The real power is when breath supports genuine care. If you're a seeker prone to collecting experiences, try a practice that counters accumulation. After any notable session, write one sentence about how the experience altered your behavior in the following 24 hours. This simple metric turns ephemeral peaks into proxies for integration. Did you speak differently? Did you rest differently? Did you admit error more readily? Focus on concrete behavioral markers rather than peak feeling. This is how spiritual practice becomes moral formation. We should also consider the role of ritual and lineage. Many traditions have enacted breath within the framing of ritual, community, and ethical guidance. Sufi practices, for instance, are embedded in forms of counsel, mentorship, and community life. When borrowing techniques honor their context, use them with respect, credit, and humility. Ritual gave these practices their safety and meaning. Stripped of context, techniques can be hollow. Approach inherited forms as resources, not trophies. And now, for those who want to deepen beyond micro-practices, here are gentle directions for cultivating a sustainable breath practice without exoticizing it. First, choose a daily window of 2 to 10 minutes. Morning or evening works for many, but any predictable slot will do. Second, begin with the 4-station cycle as present practice. 2 to 5 cycles of inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Third, journal 1 sentence about what you noticed. Fourth, place 1 small behavioral experiment in your day, a mindful pause before answering email, a breath before a meeting, or a breath to soften when you notice yourself arguing. Fifth, after 2 weeks, reflect. What patterns shifted? Adjust the practice accordingly. Study and research suggest that such micro-habits change baseline effective tone. Without requiring dramatic retreats, they accumulate subtly. If you choose to pursue deeper work, retreats, extended breathwork sessions, or intensive somatic therapy, do so with competent guidance. The ethical posture is always containment before intensity. Before we close, I want to return to the 3 registers that have guided us: mythic, psychological, physiological. They are not separate domains, but different lenses on the same process. The reed metaphor teaches us how hollowness can become voice. Jung shows us that integration is the trajectory through which exiled parts re-enter life. Physiology supplies the mechanism. Breath modifies vagal tone, which modulates arousal chemistry and therefore perception. Together, they form the Hermetic argument. The vibration you sustain shapes the field through which life returns to you. Let us do one last simple experiment together, a single, deliberate breath that touches each station. Remember the safety caveats. If you feel faint, reduce counts. If you are unsure, shorten the breath or practice with a companion. Sit upright. Let your hands rest. Bring attention to the body. Inhale. Gather slowly, as if inviting freshness into the belly. Imagine filling from the base of the lungs up into the chest. If counts help, think 4. Pause at fullness. Rest your attention in that fullness for a moment. Notice whether you want to hold the feeling tight. Let the moment be simply observed. Exhale. Release intentionally, twice as long as the inhale, if comfortable. Allow the out-breath to be a letting go, not a pushing. Pause at emptiness. Rest in the quiet. Notice what arises in that interval. Images, sensations, small changes in perception. When this cycle completes, sit quietly and notice differences. Are the edges softer? Is there a slight shift in how the world presents itself for the next moment? Note it. Journal 1 line if it helps. After that breath, I noticed. This is the start of evidence collection. If you found the practice useful, consider committing to 3 of these cycles, once or twice a day for a week, noting subtle shifts in how you respond in common situations. Watch for 3 markers. Language. Do you speak differently? Tempo. Do you move more slowly or deliberately? And invitation. Do others respond differently? These are practical indexes of how inner vibration maps to outer pattern. Breath is powerful, and power deserves respect. If profound material arises, sustained panic, intense memories, or dissociation, this work is best held with professional guidance. Breath is a bridge, and some crossings require a guide. What matters most is how you test this in ordinary life. Treat the practice as an experiment, not a promise. The Hermetic idea that everything vibrates reveals itself only through lived evidence, in perception, in behavior, in relationship. If this made sense to you, write in the comments. The emptiness has a purpose. The next video on your screen continues this exact thread, moving from inner vibration into real-world interaction. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.